Picture a moment where you did something completely out of character.
Yeah.
Like maybe it was just a flash of sudden vicious anger directed at someone you love.
Right.
Or maybe, a moment of intense, irrational panic that seemingly just came out of nowhere.
Hmm.
We have this tendency to look at those moments or those persistent, dark, intrusive thoughts, and we categorize them as an invasion.
Oh, absolutely. We treat them like foreign entities.
Yeah, exactly. We call them our inner demons. We imagine this like cinematic, fundamental struggle between light and dark happening right inside our own minds. But what if that entirely adversarial framing is just completely wrong?
Well, that's exactly what we're looking at today.
Right. What if everything we have been taught about the concept of evil is actually just a massive misunderstood glitch in our psychological software?
It is a wild thought. I mean, because we are so conditioned to view human nature as this constant battleground.
Yeah.
But the text we are examining today is called Demonic Possession, the illusion of evil and the inherent angelic nature. And it just asks us to step completely outside of that moral binary.
Yeah, and it's a pretty dense ontological text. We have a lot of sources to pull from for this deep dive. But the primary material is really looking at the fundamental nature of being.
Right. It treats the human mind not as some, spiritual war zone, but as a complex, self-regulating system.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because right off the bat, to lay the groundwork, the author is using words like angelic and demonic, and I feel like we need to strip away the theological baggage of that immediately.
Oh, for sure. We have to clarify that right now.
Yeah, because this isn't about historical religious texts or folklore. The text is using these terms to describe structural states of being.
Yes. So the author basically reclaims the word angelic to define the default architecture of human consciousness.
Like the baseline.
Exactly. If we think of ontology as the hardware, like the fundamental reality of what we are, this angelic baseline is the source code. It is the uncorrupted original state of the system before it encounters any friction.
So it's basically like a smartphone's factory settings.
Yeah, that's a perfect way to look at it. Pure, clean, functioning perfectly.
So the text outlines 3 specific traits that make up this baseline, and I really want to spend some time on them because, they set up the stakes for everything else. The first is what they call structural alignment.
Right. Structural alignment.
And it's described as a default drive toward connection and systemic harmony.
Yeah, I mean, it is the inherent gravity of the human system. Biologically and psychologically, we are built to co-regulate. We actively seek equilibrium with our environment and with others.
We want to connect.
We have to connect. It's how the system survives. And then the second trait is purity of perception.
Which means what, exactly? Like taking things at face value?
Essentially, yes. It's the system's capacity to observe reality without the distortion of defensive filters.
Oh, I see.
It is the ability to take in data, whether that's a conversation, an event, a relationship exactly as it is, without instantly running it through a threat detection algorithm.
Wow, wouldn't that be nice? Just experiencing something without immediately bracing for impact.
Exactly. And the third trait is what the text calls inherent value. And this is where the text plants a really massive flag.
Yeah, this part was huge.
It insists that this inherent value is an immutable state. It precedes trauma, it precedes conditioning, and crucially, it cannot be destroyed.
Wait, it can't be destroyed at all, no matter what happens to a person.
Right. The structure can be obscured, definitely.
Yeah.
The system can become so burdened by misaligned data that the baseline is entirely hidden from view. But the core architecture remains intact. It is fundamentally indestructible.
Okay, so we have this baseline that is naturally connective, perceives reality clearly, and cannot be destroyed. Let's ground this for you listening. If we think of the human psyche like a highly complex biological organism, this angelic baseline is like a perfectly functioning autoimmune system, right?
That's a great analogy.
Or like a network of pristine stem cells. It only knows how to grow, repair, and connect. But obviously, there's a disconnect here.
A massive disconnect, yes.
Because if our factory settings are so pure, and we are structurally designed to be this coherent, harmonious system, why do people do terrible things? I mean, if this source code is immutable, the concept of evil has to come from somewhere, right?
Well, the text addresses this by moving from ontology, which is what we are, to epistemology, which is how we process information and recognize patterns.
Okay, so it shifts from the hardware to the software processing.
Exactly. The author argues that evil is not an independent ontological force. It does not exist as a substance or an actual entity. It is an epistemological error.
An error in how we process reality.
Precisely. The text actually refers to evil as a privation of structural integrity.
Privation, so like a lack of something.
Yes, it is the shadow cast by an incomplete understanding of the self. Think about it. A shadow isn't made of dark matter, right?
Right.
It is simply the absence of light caused by an obstruction. So when our psychological system encounters complex internal data that it lacks the operational logic to integrate, it creates an obstruction.
It glitches. The system encounters a paradox or a trauma, it just can't map, so it completely fails to integrate the information.
And when a system cannot integrate severe dissonance, it externalizes the anomaly to maintain its core equilibrium.
Wow. So it pushes it out.
Exactly. The psychological projection of that unrecognized, unintegrated pattern is what historical and cultural frameworks have called the demon.
That is wild. By categorizing our own internal friction as an external invasion, we basically let ourselves off the hook. We say, that rage isn't me, that intrusive thought isn't me, that's a demon.
Yeah, we absolve the central system of the responsibility of integrating that data. We protect our ego by creating a phantom enemy.
But the mechanism behind how that phantom enemy is created is incredibly specific in the text. Like, it outlines a sequential breakdown of systemic failure.
It does. It breaks down the glitch into 4 clear steps.
Let's get into the mechanics of that failure, because a pure system doesn't just wake up one day and decide to fracture itself. There has to be a catalyst.
The catalyst is environmental friction that exceeds the system's capacity. The text terms this first step systemic overload.
Systemic overload. Okay, so give us an example of what that looks like.
Well, imagine a child in a highly unpredictable, volatile environment. The amount of data coming in, the fear, the unpredictability, maybe the betrayal of caregivers, all of that requires a level of epistemological coherence the child simply does not possess.
Their bandwidth is totally maxed out.
Completely. The nervous system cannot map the threat because the threat is actually coming from the source of safety.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a paradox that would crash the software completely.
Right. And when the system freezes under that paradox, it initiates step 2, an emergency protocol called fragmentation.
Fragmentation, breaking apart.
Yeah. To preserve the angelic baseline, that core drive for connection and inherent value, the psyche takes the overwhelming data and the unacceptable reactions to it and just walls them off.
So if the child feels a surge of murderous rage as a survival response, but expressing that rage would mean total abandonment by the parent, the system isolates the rage.
Exactly. It fragments the psyche to survive.
It really is an autoimmune response.
Yeah.
The body walls off a perceived threat to protect the healthy tissue, even if that means attacking its own cells. The psyche is literally quarantining a part of itself to keep the main system operational.
That's spot on. And that quarantine leads directly to the third phase. I know you wanted to highlight this specific term.
Yes, calcification. That word really stuck out to me in the reading.
It's a great term for it. Once a fragment is isolated from the central consciousness, it ceases to receive new, updating data from the environment. It calcifies.
It gets trapped in the timeline of the original trauma.
Right. It develops what the author calls localized logic loops.
Localized logic loop, so it's
Yeah.
just repeating the same code.
Over and over. This isolated fragment of rage or terror operates completely independently of the maturing central consciousness. It loops the original trauma and the corresponding survival instinct endlessly.
Because it's walled off.
Exactly. It doesn't know the person is now 30 years old and safe. It only knows the parameters of the environment that forced its creation in the first place.
Okay, so 10 or 20 years go by. The central consciousness has developed, it goes to work, it builds relationships, but it has this walled-off, calcified district that is still running a survival script from childhood.
Yes.
And when something in the present environment accidentally triggers that walled-off district, we hit the final stage of the breakdown.
Step 4. The illusion of the alien.
The illusion of the alien.
Because the central consciousness executed the fragmentation so long ago, it no longer recognizes that walled-off sector as a part of itself.
It threw away the key and totally forgot it ever built the door.
Exactly. So when the calcified fragment is triggered and violently executes its defensive protocol, like that sudden overwhelming flash of rage you mentioned at the start, the central consciousness experiences it as a foreign invader.
It feels hostile.
It feels entirely separate from the self.
It feels demonic.
Exactly.
And here's where it gets really interesting for you listening. This fundamentally shifts the entire paradigm. The entity doing the evil actions, the destructive behavior, isn't a demon at all.
No, not at all.
It's actually a warped, desperately protective piece of our own angelic baseline, fighting for survival on corrupted code. It is fighting a threat that no longer exists.
That is the core revelation. The demon is actually just a highly distorted defense mechanism. It is an aspect of the inherent angel warped by the illusion of separation.
Oh man, that is so powerful.
It is doing exactly what it was designed to do. Protect the core structure. It's just doing it with an epistemological map that is decades out of date.
That reframing is staggering when you consider how we usually approach our own destructive habits. Like, if you assume you're dealing with a dark, malignant force, your instinct is to go to war.
Right, you want to fight it.
You want to execute a traditional exorcism. You want to starve the demon, battle it, push it out. But if you try to forcefully amputate a part of your own psyche that is simply running a protective logic loop, you are going to cause massive structural damage.
Oh, absolutely. Aggressive suppression only validates the fragment's core belief that the environment is hostile.
Which just makes the calcification worse.
It deepens it. The text argues that traditional methods of battling inner demons inevitably fail because they operate on the exact same epistemological error that created the problem in the first place.
The illusion of separation.
Exactly.
So if we can't fight it and we can't exercise it, how do we fix the system? How do we resolve the glitch?
Well, the text lays out a protocol for integration.
And I have to admit, I initially misunderstood this when I was reading the sources. I assumed integration meant, like, hunting down the corrupted code and forcefully rewriting it, finding that rage and demanding it act differently.
Yeah, that's a really common misinterpretation.
Yeah.
But that approach is still rooted in hostility.
Right.
The very first step of the protocol is the de-escalation of the threat matrix.
De-escalating the threat, so calming things down.
Right. You have to actively reject the narrative of evil by recognizing that this terrifying impulse is actually a misidentified, frightened internal fragment. You strip it of its supernatural power.
It stops being a monster in the dark and just becomes a simple mechanical problem of integration.
Exactly. You lower your own weapons.
Which brings us to the actual mechanics of the fix, right? The text calls it epistemological vetting. But how does a person neutrally vet a part of themselves that is actively causing them distress?
It's difficult, but it requires the central consciousness to observe the destructive pattern without moral judgment.
No labeling it as bad or evil.
Right. Instead of categorizing a sudden urge for self-sabotage as evil, you observe it systemically. You ask, where did this localized logic loop originate? What was the systemic overload that required this fragment to break away?
And most importantly, what is it desperately trying to protect?
Yes, that is the crucial question.
So you basically reverse engineer the autoimmune response. You look at the inflammation and ask, what biological signature did my body misread to cause this reaction?
Exactly. And once you identify the original purpose of the fragment, you can begin the final phase, which the text calls the reclamation of the source code.
The reclamation of the source code.
This is the author's definition of true liberation. It is the new exorcism, if you want to call it that. Liberation is not expulsion, it is structural reintegration.
So fighting your inner demons is actually the worst thing you can do. The illusion of evil only works if you believe you're corrupted. You aren't taking anything out of the house. You are opening the door to the quarantine room, turning on the lights, and showing that isolated fragment that the war is over.
Beautifully put. Reintegration means exposing the calcified logic loop to current, updated data.
You bring it into the present.
You allow the fragmented part of the psyche to finally perceive the present reality without the distortion of its outdated defensive filters. And when it realizes the existential threat is past, the localized logic loop dissolves.
Wow.
The isolated energy structurally reintegrates back into the angelic baseline.
Because the ultimate truth of the human system is coherence.
Exactly. Coherence.
The entire illusion of evil relies on your willingness to believe in your own fundamental corruption. If you accept the absolute truth of the inherent angelic baseline as your foundation, well, everything changes. The struggle stops being a moral failing and becomes a process of systemic optimization.
It demands a profound level of self-compassion, really. The text argues that the only way to dissolve the illusion of the alien is through the radical inclusion of the self.
You don't expel the demon. You debug the system and welcome that fragmented piece back home.
You welcome it back into the whole.
Okay. Think about how radically this applies to your daily life, for you listening. The next time you experience an internal reaction that feels unacceptable or monstrous-like, an impulse you want to immediately hide or punish yourself for. Pause the threat response?
Yes, just pause.
Remember the systemic framework. That impulse is not evidence of inherent darkness. You are not fundamentally flawed. You are experiencing an overloaded mechanism desperately trying to protect your inner baseline.
It is just a fragment running obsolete code.
Exactly. You don't need to wage war against it. You need to understand what it's protecting, update its data, and integrate it.
But, if we take this framework and push it to its logical conclusion, we run into a deeply uncomfortable question about the world outside of our own minds.
Oh, where are we going with this?
Well, the text focuses entirely on the internal individual self. But human society is also a complex, self-regulating system.
Oh, man. We are a macro system made up of microsystems.
Exactly. So if evil on an individual level is just a symptom of systemic overload and fragmentation, what happens when we apply that exact same lens to our societal structures?
Oh, wow, yeah.
Look at our penal systems and our approach to justice. When an individual in our society experiences profound systemic overload and acts out in ways that cause harm, what is our collective response?
We fragment them, we wall them off, we literally quarantine them in physical structures.
We treat them as external, malignant invaders.
Mm-hmm.
We define them as evil to absolve the societal macro system of the responsibility of integrating them.
Are you saying, wait, are our prisons essentially societal calcification?
That's a provocative thought I want to leave everyone with. Are they localized logic loops of trauma and violence that we have walled off simply because our culture lacks the epistemological coherence to reintegrate them?
That is heavy.
If the cure for the individual mind is structural reintegration and the dissolution of the alien illusion, we have to ask if our current societal approach to justice is just a massive collective epistemological error.
We are mirroring our internal autoimmune disorder on a global scale. We are attacking our own societal fragments because we refuse to acknowledge that they are part of our shared baseline.
It really makes you rethink everything about how we operate, internally and externally.
That is a heavy, essential concept to carry forward. We have a lot of debugging to do, both inside our own minds and in the structures we build around us.
We really do.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Hopefully, this framework offers you a new way to interact with your own internal landscape.
It's been a fascinating journey through the source material.
The next time you find yourself wrestling with an unfamiliar, frightening part of your own mind, remember, it's not a spiritual war. It's an outdated logic loop waiting for you to update the code. Keep examining your own source code, and we'll catch you next time.